So, why are there half elves, half orcs, and not really half dwarves? That's something that I was thinking about as I'm writing a book that involves dwarves, and I put in a half dwarf as a shopkeeper, and it made me stop and think. The thought was just zero. Just like, make the shopkeeper unique. They're a little bit taller than other dwarves. They're a bit thinner. And then I thought about it, and I said, well, I've never seen a half dwarf. I've never thought about a half dwarf. Why are there no half dwarves? Is it cultural, or is it biological? And that thought sent me down the rabbit hole. Now I'm thinking about the biological implications of crossbreeding between the different fantasy races. So here's what I came up with. Everything is on a scale. On the furthest left of the scale, you have your dwarves. They're short, they're stocky, live in caves. You've got on the right of the scale, which is your elves. These are tall, and lithe, and beautiful, live in trees. And above, in the center, you have humans. And then above humans, you've got orcs. And below humans, you've got giants. The way I think about this is that a human and an elf can breed. And that would create a viable offspring. And a viable offspring is an offspring that can then have kids. So that's important. That's called speciation. If the offspring cannot have kids, like a liger, then you are a different species, and your offspring are non-viable. So a human and an elf can have a viable offspring. Think Aragorn being related to Elrond, right? Obviously, there's viable offspring between the two because they're related. But an elf and a dwarf could not have a viable offspring. They could have an offspring, but they couldn't have a viable one. So there's a speciation line there somewhere around the middle of humans. And the same thing goes for giants and orcs. They both can't have a half orc giant, half giant. You can't. That's viable. And you can't have a half elf, half orc. But you can have a half human and a half giant. So what that left was a strange blank spot because gnomes are a thing. So where the hell are gnomes on the chart? Well, an obvious place to put them would be to the left of dwarves. But I don't think that they're even from the same stock. By the way, there are no halflings in my book, but I would put halflings to the left of dwarves. So gnomes in my story did not evolve from surface creatures like dwarves did. They did not come from some offshoot of the elves or something like that. They were so far and away, so deep in the ground that they had no contact. They had completely separate evolution in a completely separate environment. And so gnomes can't breed with anybody. And in some way I tried to so then I thought, well, would they want to? Would a gnome consider a dwarf attractive? And that starts the thought process of what would each race find attractive? And weirdly enough, there's a precedent for this. It's pretty well believed because of how our genetics panned out that Neanderthals and hominids, or no, what were they called? Homo sapiens, both kind of found each other attractive, right? Like the Neanderthals found human women attractive, and the Homo sapien women attractive, and the Homo sapien men found the Neanderthal women attractive, or just had no standards, unknown. Cave people probably didn't give a shit. So that explains the really thorough interbreeding, because if it was just like a onesie-twosie kind of thing, you really wouldn't have gotten a thorough, broad, widespread interbreeding. You would have gotten just smattering, small percentages in some areas. And so it looks like pretty universally, no matter where they were, hominids and Neanderthals Homo sapiens and Neanderthals figured it out. So then I had to think about it, like who would find what attractive and for why. So here's how it went for me. No one finds giant females attractive, like the female race, or the giant race. They are antithetical to femininity by most races' considerations. So humans do not pursue relationships with giant women. Elf women are very attractive by human standards. And so humans very, very much pursue relationships with female elves. Male elves consider female humans to be kind of masculine. So there's not a lot of male on female when it comes to the elves. The orcs are just bastards, and we're not going to talk too much about them. They don't really have an attraction thing at all. They're just bad. And then, obviously, human females find elves attractive, male elves, and the male giants find female humans attractive. There's some implications there, and it's part of the reason it's very rare to find a half-giant at all. So, then it goes to dwarves, and they're just kind of not attractive to anybody. Some human men will try to hook up with female dwarves, but male dwarves are just not interested. And partially this is because the dwarves in general, being a very long-lived species, and this to some extent also applies to elves, do not have a sex drive. Because unlike elves who can afford to at least have a little bit of one, the dwarves live in confined spaces with limited resources. So they can't really afford to be having a kid every year if they're going to live for 400 years. So effectively, dwarves have no sex drive at all, which is why you basically don't run into half-dwarves. You would have to have a human male interested in a dwarven female in a very specific window of time in which dwarven females are looking to mate. And that's just not going to happen very often. So, all in all, that's a lot of thought to say that there is no longer a half-dwarf running a shop in my book.
Wants to get lucky, and every dwarf wants to get hunky-dory. Every ogre wants to find their mate and settle down with them behind the gate.